Do all Americans have the ability to exercise their rights?
In the Declaration of Independence, it states that every man is created equal and should have equal rights. However, the citizens living in the District of Columbia do not have equal voting and representation rights. In 1775, we went to war against the British over being taxed with no representation in Parliament. But even 226 years later, has this taxation without representation come again?
During and after the Revolutionary War, the nation's first capital was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In 1790, the U.S. Constitution made provisions to establish a national capital and gave guidelines for its creation.
The Residency Act of 1790 gave then-President George Washington the power to choose the site of the new capital. The site chosen was an area along the Potomac and Anacostia rivers on land that was taken from southern Maryland and northern Virginia, creating a district that was a neutral region. The law also said it would be 10 by 10 miles square.
Founders didn't want to put the full powers of the capital of the country in one single state. By creating the district in this area, the centralized power of the country did not rest in the confines of a single state. One reason for this particular neutral site was because it needed to be in a place which supported slavery to keep Thomas Jefferson and the southern states satisfied, but it also had to be in an area where the Revolutionary War had been fought to keep Alexander Hamilton in the North content.
The city was designed by Pierre-Charles L'Enfant and was originally intended to be commercial in nature. There was no concession for monuments or a large population in its original plans. Because of this original design and intent for the district, the founders made no provisions in the Constitution on how the inhabitants of the city would be governed or what specific rights and responsibilities they would have. This lack of guidance has led the District of Columbia and its citizens to face challenges since its inception in how it is to be governed and represented.
As far back as 1800, the citizens of the District of Columbia did not elect all of their own officials. The first mayor of D.C. was appointed by President Washington, and the voters then elected a 12-person council. Things got better for the people when just 10 years later, the council was able to elect the mayor. This progression of rights continued when 8 years later, residents of this city elected both their own mayor and governing council.
This voting arrangement was kept in place until the turmoil of the Civil War and the resulting martial law that was declared in the city during that time. In 1871, after the war, the 44th Congress enacted the Enforcement Act of 1871, which in part took voting power back from the residents and allowed President Ulysses S. Grant to appoint a governor and a council. An elected House of Delegates and a non-voting delegate to Congress were also created at that time. 3 commissioners, 2 civilian commissioners, and a military corps commissioner were established to help manage this city.
This form of government lasted until the 1960s. In 1961, the 23rd Amendment allowed the residents of D.C. to vote for president and other public officials. In 1973, Congress then allowed D.C. citizens to vote for a mayor and a 13-member council.
The way things have stood since 1973, the District of Columbia has been allowed to vote in presidential elections, elect their own city council and mayor, and are required to pay federal taxes. They do not, however, have voting representation in Congress. The Constitution states that Congress will be made up of representatives from each of the states, which the District of Columbia is not.
Currently, in addition to 435 voting members, the U.S. House of Representatives features 5 non-voting seats. Representatives from the District of Columbia as well as the U.S. territories of American Samoa, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands fill these 5 seats. Each of these non-voting delegates has the same amount of power, but only the District of Columbia is federally taxed and allowed to vote for president. In the presidential election, they have the same amount of electoral votes as the smallest state in population, which is currently Wyoming, even though D.C. has a bigger population than Wyoming.
The current delegate for D.C. is Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. Congresswoman Norton has a vision of how a perfect American capital should look. Her views on the D.C. citizens are that if they are taxed and bound to the same responsibilities of citizenship, like fighting in wars and being a policeman, as any other citizen of America, that they should have the same rights and representation. Most citizens of D.C. believe that after they have gained the right to vote for president, they should now be allowed to vote in Congress. Many bills reflecting these views have been introduced to Congress through Eleanor Holmes Norton.
The only bill to go to Senate was the Statehood Bill of 2009. This bill would have given D.C. and Utah an additional representative in the House. Since D.C. is over 80% Democratic and Utah is almost completely Republican, it would have kept the Senate balanced. However, one of the senators added an amendment to the bill that would have abolished D.C.'s gun laws. Congresswoman Norton made the decision not to accept the bill.
The issue of home rule for the District of Columbia is one of the many things that Norton is fighting for. The gun law attachment is an example of how Congress has a say in how the people of D.C. can or can't govern themselves. As the federal capital, the Constitution grants the United States Congress exclusive jurisdiction over the district in all cases whatsoever.
For example, granting home rule would give the people decision on gun laws in the Hyde Act, a law which Congress enacted which says no building can be taller than the Washington Monument, 13 stories or over 130 feet. Although this act could be taken as respect to Washington, one of the founders of America, residents of D.C. see it as a limiting to the potential growth of a thriving city.
Some citizens in D.C. and the general American population have no opinion of what happens to the District of Columbia citizens. When asked, people believe in theory that the people of D.C. should have a vote in Congress. But since the issue is so complicated, most people, even some citizens of the district, believe a good compromise has been reached, which allows them to live in a great city with all its beauty and history and vote for president. Paying taxes for those benefits is simply what a good citizen should do, as D.C. resident Jessica Killen states.
Class family, and I was in the Army, and then I went to law school, and I have managed to get myself an amazing job in an amazing city with amazing people. I'm sort of an American, I feel like I've lived the American dream, and part of living the American dream is paying back to this amazing country, and part of that is paying my taxes, regardless of what my representation is in Congress.
The situation going forward is not clear-cut. Many people argue that the writers of the Constitution never intended for the citizens of the district not to have a vote in Congress, and that the language of the Declaration is being misinterpreted. Some people believe that there should be another amendment to the Constitution which allows another representative from the district, and others still believe that Washington, D.C. should become the country's 51st state, called New Columbia.
One thing is certain, however. Congresswoman Norton will continue to act strongly against the taxation without representation and publicly announce her opinions of the predicament wherever she can go. We leave you with her words on the issue.
They are taxed without representation. They are asked to assume the responsibilities of citizenship while denied one of its basic rights.